ever wondered what the most OP character in all of My Hero Academia would look like? I mean, someone more overpowered than All Might, or even All For One. Well, in this video, I'm going to create the strongest character in all of My Hero Academia, and I've chosen a number of quirks for that character to inherit. He's going to be so strong that not even someone like All For One has a chance of stopping him, and if the entire hero organization were to make the grave mistake of hunting him down, he'd still be the apex predator. I mean, Deku wouldn't even leave a scratch on this character. But before we dive into it, let's set some rules. First off, I can only get one quirk from a character. Second, the way the quirks blend together and how they assimilate into this character's body has to make sense. Even though this is a purely fictional video, we just can't go around and bend the limitations of the human body. Third, I cannot choose more than 10 quirks because it would just be boring if I said that I added every single quirk in the universe into him. Not only that, we'll be making our character fight 3 of the strongest characters in My Hero Academia to see how he can win. So let's start by giving him a name. I think a good one would be Synergy. It's perfect because he synergizes all the different quirks that are inside him, and it sounds great whether he's a hero or a villain. Now to start, let's choose his first quirk. This one has to be his base quirk, and it's the key to him to having the ability to insert multiple quirks inside his body. And you probably already know what quirk I'm talking about. Any guesses? Well, obviously, it's going to be All For One. This was the quirk of the main antagonist of the series, and how it works is that it allows him to steal and use his target's quirks. But not only that, All For One gives him the ability to give the stolen quirks to others. He could steal quirks by touching the original users, but he could not copy their proficiency. I specifically chose All For One because it is the only reason why we could use multiple quirks in the first place. With this, we are able to build up our arsenal without destroying our body in the process. This also gives us the ability to steal those quirks from the original users and take them for ourselves, which means our character is going to either be a villain or an anti-hero like Stain was. This is only one of the 9 quirks we'll be talking about today, and let's just say the last trait is one that will make us the most overpowered character in the series, and I don't think you can guess what it is. We've chosen our base quirk, so what comes next? Well, you might be surprised that I'm going ahead with Muscular's quirk, Muscle Augmentation. This quirk allows us to manipulate our muscle layers, which not only increases our durability, but also boosts our raw physical strength. This quirk is such a top-tier ability in terms of power that Deku, earlier in the series, had trouble dealing with him with One For All. But we all know how Deku disrespected this guy in their second encounter. Anyways, I chose this quirk so that we can have additional reinforcements for Synergy's body. It would also give us some good resistance against physical attacks. Muscle augmentation is so durable to the point that we're essentially bulletproof, just as Goto was when he escaped Tartarus. This would even give us a significant advantage against strength-type heroes like All Might. But the next one might come as a crazy choice, and it's a relatively underrated quirk. But hear me out. Our third quirk is going to be Gear Shift. I bet some of you have never even heard about it before, so spoilers ahead! It was the quirk of the second user of One For All, and the leader of the resistance movement that tried to fight back against All For One. Now, it's a relatively weak ability that could only affect small objects. What it does is that it gives its user the ability to change the speed of an object and completely ignore the laws of inertia. All For One called it a pea shooter, but after it evolved because it melded into One For All, it became so strong! Even Deku had a hard time controlling it. So what's to say that it won't evolve if we meld it with All For One? If Gear Shift evolves, our character could use the move Transmission, where we could increase the speed of our punches just like when Deku used it, and it was so fast that every hit broke the sound barrier. Now imagine pairing Transmission and Gear Shift up with Muscle Augmentation. Synergy would become a beast in close quarters combat. But we're not only going to focus on our physical stats here, because the next 2 abilities are going to level the playing field, literally. On our left hand specifically, I want to give Synergy the quirk known as Overhaul. This was used by Kai Chisaki in the series, and it allowed him to reassemble or disassemble any type of physical matter with his bare hands. Yes, this was the quirk that made Magnate's upper body and Mr. Compress's left arm go pop! However, we cannot recombine objects or beings because it would require us to use both of our hands. And to be honest, that isn't even that big of a loss because you'll know why I didn't add Overhaul to our right hand later. With Overhaul, our character can instantly one-shot any enemy that comes our way by touching them, and he can even reshape the entire battlefield to favor him. Synergy can use the same tactic as Kai, where we reassemble the ground into a violent landscape full of spikes. He can even block ranged attacks by reshaping the landscape into a shield. One weakness we have with this though, is that the effects of Overhaul are only limited to the target that we touch. But it won't matter, because in our right hand, we have Shigaraki's Decay. yeah, it sounds like I'm only taking quirks from villains, but that's because they are just so overpowered. Decay is just like Overhaul, but it only focuses on disassembly, and with that comes a pretty interesting feature. Unlike Overhaul, where our character needs to touch the target, Decay can spread to anything that's connected to the thing that we touch. It's just pure raw destruction. The Awakened version of Decay was even more OP, because with just one touch, Shigaraki was able to level an entire city, and anyone that was in the area was turned to dust. At one point, Shigaraki's control of this quirk was so on point that he could even activate it using his feet. If this quirk was enough to overpower someone like Star and Stripe, it's safe to say that anyone who's in our way will be as good as dead. Overhaul is a great choice if the enemy has strong physical resistance, while Decay is best used when we're fighting multiple opponents at once. With muscle augmentation for durability and gear shift for speed, our character is going to be a walking catastrophe. When the enemy tries to run, we can use gear shift to catch up to them, and if they have hardening like Red Riot, they are still vulnerable to Overhaul and Decay. But it doesn't end there yet, because Decay was only our 5th quirk, and the next one is going to be even more surprising than Gear Shift. What is this quirk? Well, it's a little known ability called Foresight, and if you can't remember, the original user was Sir Night-Eye. Although we didn't get to see it in a proper fight, Sir Night-Eye used Foresight to completely dodge all of Deku's OFA augmented attacks. It was said that Sir Night-Eye could be virtually untouchable in battle, no matter how fast his enemies were. However, this quirk has pretty limited usage conditions. The only way Foresight could be activated is when the user touches the target, and then the user has to maintain eye contact with them. Once used, Foresight can only be activated again after 24 hours. Still, even with these drawbacks, I think it's a pretty good deal. When using Foresight, there's no exact limit on how far into the future our character can see, and this is great when fighting someone like Shigaraki who can turn us to dust the moment he touches us. It's also great when trying to gather information, as we can see our target's future actions, just not when it will happen. In my opinion, this is one of the best support quirks our character can have, and it's not only good for dodging attacks, but great for predicting and countering the enemy's movements as well. If we weren't overpowered enough, say hello to another quirk known as Brainwashing. It was used by Hitoshi Shinso. The quirk allows Shinso to force any target to obey his commands as long as they meet a single requirement. The target needs to respond verbally when brainwashing is activated. What's even cooler is that it's not limited to one target and can be used to control multiple individuals at once. One weakness of brainwashing is that the targets cannot do complex tasks and that the targets need to respond before it takes effect. In addition, the target can escape when they have experienced significant pain, which is not too bad. I think brainwashing can be best used during the first strike and for assassination missions. With a gadget like Persona Chords that can mimic other people's voices, our character can just brainwash an enemy and make them walk to him, ensuring an easy win. They'll just walk up to Synergy and he can give them a tap on the shoulder with his right hand, turning them into dust. It's also a great choice if we want to infiltrate areas, because brainwashed targets can talk to the point where they can bypass lie detectors. It's a quirk that increases our chances of winning up to 100% if our opponent is alone. And it's so potent that Hitoshi was even able to brainwash a villain like Gigantomachia. So if you don't want to be brainwashed, like and subscribe. Unless you already are. Moving on to our second to last quirk, we have quite possibly one of the most OP quirks in the entire series, even when a kid was using it. It's none other than Rewind. The owner of this quirk in the series is called Eri, and what it does is that it rewinds a living being's physical body into a previous state. It was so potent that it could be used to destroy quirks inside a person. If used improperly, the target can even be rewinded to the point where they never existed in the first place by affecting their genetic makeup. The quirk was unstable because Eri was a kid and could not learn how to control it. However, when it's in our character's hands, it becomes a deadly tool that could effectively not only make Synergy immortal by healing his wounds and rewinding his age, but it gives him more options to deal with his opponents. I'm not exaggerating here, because the drug that All For One used to heal his injuries and turn him back into his prime was derived from Rewind itself. What our character has to watch out for, though, is that Rewind needs to accumulate an unknown elements before it could be activated. So essentially, this quirk is our trump card and will only be used as a last resort in life-threatening situations. With that out of the way, if you remember at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that the last quirk is going to be unexpected and will cement Synergy as the strongest character in all of My Hero Academia. That's why for his last quirk, I am going to choose Double. Yes, the quirk that was used by Jin Bubai Gawara, otherwise known as Twice. At first, Twice could only produce 2 clones at a time, but when he overcame his trauma, he used a move called Sad Man's Parade, where he created 2 clones, and because his clones had access to the quirk, they created doubles of themselves, and so on, until there was basically thousands upon thousands of Twices. This is such an overpowered quirk that when Himiko Toga used it, she essentially created a tidal wave of clones, enough to overwhelm the heroes. Not only that, Double can be used to clone other people as well. The weakness this quirk has is that our character needs a flawless image of the target they intend tend to double, but since we just want to double ourselves, it doesn't even matter anymore. Just imagine waves upon waves of synergy rampaging through the city, using every single quirk within our arsenal. Even if our copies are less durable and powerful, sheer numbers would be enough to literally take over the entire world. Synergy has his own army of overpowered quirk users. With this, even someone like All For One would have a hard time dealing with our character, and the sheer amount of destruction the clones could do with Decay and Overhaul is beyond my imagination. Now that we know our character is essentially so powerful that it's enough to call him a god, have you ever wondered what would happen if you fought these three characters in their prime? The first character we're going to be talking about is, of course, Prime All For One. The scenario that I could think about here is that our character and All For One have to duke it out to see who can rule the entire world. The ultimate villain versus villain battle! Unlike Synergy, All For One has an untold amount of quirks, and he could easily detect our character even if he was miles away using the quirk Search. This means that we can't have our first strike advantage with brainwashing, because it would have to be a face-off. All For One would make the first move, and I think he would use warping to attack us from behind, or if he's arrogant enough, our character would first have to reinforce his body with muscle augmentation to increase our durability, and then our aim would be to use gear shift to touch All For One, even if it's just for a moment, even if it doesn't mean we can activate Decay or Overhaul on time. Once we touch him, our character can use foresight to predict his every move, and that would guarantee our win. I think this would be a drawn-out battle with quirk after quirk being used against us. However, since we can easily dodge his attacks and counter using foresight, we can slowly whittle him down using Overhaul to get rid of his attacks and Decay to stop him from getting too close to us and stealing our quirks. At the end, our character might even have to use Rewind, but it's no doubt a victory for us, and All For One would be nothing more than dust. Or if Synergy was crazy enough to use one of his clones to hug All For One and unleash the full potential of Rewind, we could erase him out of existence. But what would happen if we fought All Might? Well, honestly, I don't think All Might's gonna be much of a challenge. All Might is a close quarters combat expert, but that doesn't mean anything if he can't get close to us. And since All Might doesn't have the ability to fly, we can easily use Decay to destroy the surrounding area and use the chain reaction to get rid of him. If that doesn't work and we engage in a physical battle, we have muscle augmentation and foresight to rely on. Not to mention, gear shift increases the speed of our punches while muscle augmentation can increase the power. If it looks like we're losing in a brawl, we could always overwhelm All Might with double, jumping him with an uncountable amount of clones with augmented bodies. Let's just see how long he could last with that. Maybe we won't even need to use Overhaul and Decay, as we watch All Might struggling with our clones while we drink coffee and watch the spectacle happen. We've won against the symbol of peace and the symbol of chaos, so who's our third character that's crazy enough to fight us? It's none other than the #1 hero of America, Star and Stripe. Honestly, compared to the two previous battles, this one might be the trickiest, and it's all because of her quirk. What it does is that it allows her to manipulate and add rules to herself or virtually anything else. She can manipulate both living and inanimate objects, like the air. Star and Stripe could even add a rule where our heart will stop. But why didn't I choose New Order as one of our character's quirks? Well, I wanted to make this fight interesting. You see, the way we could win is by analyzing the conditions of her quirk. First, she has to come in contact with us. And second, she has to speak our character's name, and our identity must align to her own understanding of who we are. This quirk is too dangerous for close quarters combat, and it means we can't use quirks like Overhaul, Decay, Muscle Augmentation, and even Foresight. We cannot see the future, and we can't predict her movements, adding another layer of difficulty. But does her quirk apply to our clones? You see, even if it does, it will only affect the clone itself and not us, because the clones that are generated by Double essentially have their own pseudo-personalities. This was made clear when Twice's clones tried to kill each other as if they thought they were the original. If we apply that same concept here, New Order would be rendered ineffective. In almost every battle, the double quirk has been vital, but it is our saving grace in this one. Our character could just produce thousands of clones to fight Star and Stripe, and even if she nukes Synergy with the help of her fighter squadron, they won't know who the real deal is. It would just be clone after clone after clone, and if even one of our clones could touch her, she'd be weakened by Decay, and then another one could use Overhaul, disassembling her in the process. And as always, there's that self-destructing clone that could use Rewind on her. And it's Synergy's win! Having said all that, there is no one that could literally stop our character. May it be the Demon King, All For One, or the Rising Star, Deku, they'd just be overwhelmed with our insane arsenal of quirks. But what do you think? What quirk combination could be stronger than the one we just mentioned? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. See you on the next one.